AviationPros.com is the portal website for AMT, Airport Business, and Ground Support Worldwide magazines. Visit daily for breaking news, industry blogs, and insightful articles from our magazine's editorial team. And don't forget to sign up for our publication's daily e-newsletters. It's all at AviationPros.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Aviation Pros podcast. I'm Joe Petrie, Editorial Director for Aviation Pros. Recent crash landing of the Red Air jet at Miami International Airport was an important reminder for the need of properly trained and equipped ARFF teams at airports. Despite crashing and skidding down the runway and catching fire, there were no fatalities and only a handful of injuries. I recently spoke with Ben Sokol, Lead ARFF Program Instructor for Fox Valley Technical College, located at the ATW ARFF Training Center at Appleton International Airport, about the challenges first responders face on the airfield and what airports need to think about now to ensure their teams are ready for a major incident. Well, Ben, thank you for coming and joining us today for this conversation. I think it's really important to have, especially in the events of recently at Miami International Airport, where they had a emergency situation that arose with the Red Air crash landing. So I think it's a good time to just refresh on some of the things that ARFF crews need to know and, things airports need to be considering. So my first question is let's talk about a little bit and tell me about some of the common challenges that ARFF teams face when responding to an incident and how an underprepared crew might not be able to properly address these challenges.
Sure. One of the main challenges that we face in aircraft firefighting is actually personnel. Making sure that we have adequate personnel and they're properly trained and ready to respond is sometimes a little bit of a challenge, to make sure we have the right people in place and they're not only trained but comfortable with their equipment and how to respond. And they're very familiar with the plan based on what we're responding to. Some of the other common challenges can be simply access to the scene. Most of us that work on airports, we're very familiar with our airfield and surrounding area. And we think about those taxiways and those runways that we can normally drive down to get to an emergency scene. But in an emergency scene, depending on what we're faced with, some of those avenues may not be accessible to us. They might be blocked by debris, evacuating passengers, other vehicles, the wind keeping driving smoke across those where it's not a safe avenue of approach. So thinking about preparing for accessing different parts of your airfield and the surrounding area from different routes is very important. Having not only your primary but your secondary or complementary access routes and standby locations is going to be very important, and making sure that everybody is aware of those and know exactly where they're supposed to go given the incident that we're facing. Another really common challenge is going to be agent. Most aircraft apparatus are going to have a certain amount of water, foam, and complementary agents, whether that's dry chem or clean agent on them. Getting resupplied is often a challenge. Most airfields do not have much as far as water resupply. So you could have a 1,500-gallon ARFF truck. We can refill that water tank 2 or 3 times to be able to use up all of our foam and be able to sustain that fight and create that rescue path. But once we run out of that 1,500 gallons, how do we resupply? So we have to train with and have a good plan with our mutual aid or automatic response from outside the airport to make sure that we can get resupplied, make sure that we can continue the fight. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Sometimes some airports are located in areas where they just don't have a lot of mutual aid or automatic aid nearby. That could be a 10 or 15 minute response for those outside agencies. Another common challenge is going to be familiarity with the aircraft. Sometimes we get these emergency situations and it's not an aircraft that we're overly familiar with, which can cause a little bit of anxiety while you're responding, because it's not an aircraft that you just know inside and out because you've been studying it and working around it for quite a while. So knowing the basics of the category of aircraft and the common challenges with that aircraft and having a good plan for an unknown aircraft is going to be very important for us to be able to overcome those challenges, to make sure that we are prepared in the event something like this does happen.
Now, there's a lot of considerations you just mentioned there. So tell me a little
Mhm.
bit, what are some of the basic elements an airport needs to have in order for its ARF crews and equipment for that matter to make sure they're ready to handle an emergency response?
Well, making sure that we have the right type of apparatus and the right number of crew for our index of airport is going to be very important, which, more or less across the board, everybody's got that down. Making sure that we have that stuff in place, we have the right equipment, we have the right people, they're well trained, making sure they're familiar with the airport emergency plan is going to be very critical. They have to know their role and then practice that role. And that doesn't just go to the on airport responders. That also applies to the off airport responders. Most airports are going to at least somewhat rely upon outside agencies. So those agencies have to understand what their role is, what equipment they should be bringing, how many personnel they should be bringing, where their standby locations are, and what they're expected to do once they're brought on scene. Um, if they're not prepared for that, that's going to make more of a challenge than it really needs to be. So having a good, strong airport emergency plan and making sure that we are properly training everybody that's in there beyond our triennial is going to be important. Um, Again, making sure our ARFF apparatus is in working order, it's equipped, and our staff is comfortable with it. They've got lots of times behind the wheel, and they know how that particular apparatus operates is going to be very important. And all that comes through with a solid training plan. If you have a solid training plan, you can overcome a lot of these things to make sure that we're ready to handle the emergency.
And you mentioned, the different elements needed to, take care of one of these emergency situations, such as the usage of foam. Now, there's been a lot of challenges with the usage of foam. I know with
Mhm.
environmentally and that. So, how do crews prepare for using this type of tool, and the special considerations they need to have in order to mitigate some of these concerns that are out there?
Well, the first thing crews need to make sure they understand the properties of AFFF and the proper application techniques. We don't just roll up and just start spraying foam just for the sake of spraying foam. There's proper application techniques, and typically we're going to train our airport firefighters on the different techniques and how they're going to be effective. So based on what you're seeing as you're approaching that emergency scene and you're doing your 360, you can see where the emergency is taking place, where the hazard is, and what application technique you're going to use in order to mitigate that emergency. Um, and again, also along with that is agent conservation. Don't just spray all the agent just to spray all the agent. It's apply as you're darkening down that fire, as you're getting that good foam blanket, and you're knocking it down, creating that rescue path. There's times where if we did our insulate, isolate, and extinguish, maybe we can just hold fast and we're just going to protect that rescue path to make sure we're getting all those passengers and crew off the aircraft, and then we can go for complete extinguishment afterwards. Um, but it's important to make sure that we're not just dumping all of the foam just to dump all the foam. Again, with the environmental hazards that we're facing with the use of foam, we want to use those not only just because we want to protect the environment, but we want to make sure we have enough foam. If we have a flare up, we want to be able to fight again. And if we just use um, our entire cache of agent, we're out of the fight. And it's with smaller, like an Index B airport, we might not have help right away. So we have to be smart about how we're using it. And again, making sure that we're applying a way that we're attacking the fire, but we're not doing unnecessary harm to the environment. And then, of course, airports also need to have a plan. How are we going to, I guess, consolidate that and do a cleanup afterwards? How are we going to document where the foam was used and how much foam was used, and what is our cleanup procedure going to look like? That while we're still using this agent, we do need to have a plan for that.
Now, proper equipment maintenance is key to responding to any airfield incident. Which elements of ARF equipment maintenance are the most important to ensure proper response, and how can improper maintenance create some extra challenges for crews?
Sure. I mean, truck maintenance is going to be critical. A solid preventive maintenance program is going to reduce our equipment issues and ensure that our apparatus is always ready to respond. The way we train here at the ATW ARF Training Center, we teach our students day one do your daily checks. Every day you do an inspection. You're inspecting your equipment to make sure it's there and it's working. You're doing your normal checks. And the dailies are kind of a quick once over, making sure that we don't have any obvious issues. And at least weekly, you should be doing an operational checks. An operational check is going to be actually getting behind the wheel, rolling out, maybe even doing an airfield inspection while you're doing this. Bring up your pump, bring out your turrets, exercise the turrets, make sure you're going from a fog to a straight stream, make sure every little system works. If we catch it when it's a small little issue, easy to fix, and we can still respond. If the truck isn't touched for a while at a time and these systems aren't run and we have an issue, then if we have to respond, we may get on scene and realize that, oh, you know what, my roof turret is sticky and I can't seem to get to the pattern I want to get to because the turret won't go to a fog. Doing those weekly checks is going to be important. And then beyond that, your airport maintenance crew or whoever it is that does your apparatus maintenance should be doing probably quarterly checks over everything, and then your annual or hourly inspections and fluid checks and that kind of stuff, making sure that everything's ready to go, everything's working. That helps us be able to respond and know that our capabilities are still what we expect them to be. Of course, if we don't properly maintain it, it's higher likelihood that we're going to have a failure before or during an incident, and that's something we definitely don't want to have happen, obviously. So, and this goes beyond just the truck checks. This goes to if we have any other equipment, airbags or a jaws of life sort of thing, personal protective equipment. Those should be getting checked on a routine schedule to make sure that those are in working order and ready for response as well.
So then tell me about the crews when it comes to the training attributes of an ARFF team. What should they be handling on a regular basis outside of just preparing for annual certifications? I mean, what can they be doing on grounds to make sure they're prepared for an emergency incident?
Sure. I think a really important thing is airfield familiarization. Again, know where our trucks can go and where they can't. Most ARFF apparatus, they're all-wheel drive vehicles. They're made for going off-road. They don't just have to stay on the hard pack. Knowing where we can take them off the hard pack, where we cannot, our different access routes, things of that nature are going to be really helpful for us to response. Because again, we can't expect to have 360-degree access to these emergencies. There's going to be times where we're going to have to take a slightly different route. We have to make sure that the route we're taking is safe for us and the apparatus, so we don't, again, take ourselves out of the fight by, getting stuck in the mud or something to that effect, right? Along with that, the area outside, we call it outside the fence, outside the airport grounds. Unfortunately, sometimes these incidents are not happening in airport grounds. They're happening out in a cornfield or in the woods or in a swamp, and we have to have a plan of how are we going to get to that area, what can we do in that area, and again, who else is going to come in to help us out and then train with those folks. Other really important ones that I think that go above and beyond just our normal, the FAA topics and our annual live fire, turret operations. Getting your folks familiar with turret operations. When I was still in our department, we used to do during our operational tracks, even in the middle of winter, we would find a tree or some kind of target, somewhere where we're not going to make a mess and it's not going to cause a problem. But we would practice doing pump and roll operations. Fire up the pump, start spraying water, try to hit a tree, a rock, what have you, some cones out in a open area, try to get that water in that area while you're moving. It's a good skill to build on because that's something that we often are going to have to do on a scene, is be able to multitask and be able to pump and roll. And it's an acquired skill. It's not something that just happens. So that's an important one as well. Again, training with any kind of hand tools or power tools, if you have them equipped, you should always know how all your equipment is going to work before there's an emergency. We shouldn't be trying to learn during an emergency, obviously. Forward-looking infrared is a big one that is newer for some airport firefighters. How we're going to use that while we're responding is going to be important. I mean, we can use those to spot potential victims that are outside the aircraft, where their evacuation route is in the event that we have limited visibility or darkness. We might be able to see those heat signatures of people moving away from the plane. Well, now we know that area it's kind of out of play for us. We got to protect that route, but we're not going to be able to drive through that route. And then of course we can use it to, spot fires, heat signatures from debris, that sort of thing as well. Additional training with high reach extendable turrets is always going to be a good idea. We want to make sure that if we have that equipped on our ARFF apparatus, that we're comfortable with using it, knowing its capabilities, and on and off airport. So, and then of course, if the ARFF department has as part of their mission, leaving the truck, doing handline operations or doing entry operations, those should be practiced as often as possible. Donning your equipment, pulling that hose line, making entry into that aircraft and extinguishing a fire. And there's lots of different ways to do that without a training aircraft. But repetition on that is going to build that muscle memory, and you'll be able to respond more confidently and quickly.
So there's lots of different training programs out there for ARFF teams that are provided like organizations like yourself. What are some of the specialty training programs that airports of all sizes should consider enrolling their ARFF crews in to make sure they have these superior skills in order to be able to address these emergency situations?
I think number one would be a driver operator program, not necessarily having to be a 40-hour program like what you do for like ISAC or Pro Board certification, but some kind of driver operator program, something where they are learning not only how the truck's operating, get familiar with the controls, but learning how to properly position on an emergency. Being able to quickly factor in all the hazards that they're seeing, the access issues that they're seeing, getting good proper position to be able to protect that rescue path, to facilitate evacuation and rescue if necessary. Learning how to drive, to one of these emergencies in a safe manner. Safe driving is very, very important with these types of apparatus because they're a little bit top heavy, and they do, unfortunately, sometimes their accidents do happen during response or even just timed response during a training exercise. So knowing the capabilities and how these apparatus are going to behave, again, using the turrets, learning how to pump and roll or power modulate into different positions to be able to protect the rescue path and then go for extinguishment, is going to be really good training. And it's something that it's almost a perishable skill. If you don't practice it, you're not going to be as good with it real world, right? So we want to practice that as often as we can. And again, that's something that in my career, we always try to almost incorporate into our weekly operations checks. We can always do a little drill here and there, but it's easy to set up scenarios like that on an airfield with your own crew and just say, hey, we're going to go down this taxiway. We're going to set up cones off in this area, in a safe area. We just want you to drop water from the bumper turret into those cones. Hit the square as you're moving by it. Little things like that build a lot of not only skill but also confidence. Another thing that could be useful for everybody in airport firefighting is command training and communication training. Again, doing tabletop exercises, saying we have XYZ aircraft with this many people on board, and this is the scenario that we're facing. What do we do? Do a walkthrough, a talk through, and then maybe even be able to do a scenario. Is going to be very helpful for everyone when they're responding. Again, building that confidence up is going to be instrumental in them being able to respond quickly and confidently to one of these situations. And then, of course, there's other advanced training beyond our normal Part 139 training that could be, looking at a variety of aviation incidents, the kind of stuff that we could get beyond what we normally would be considering, say, military aircraft coming in or rotorcraft coming in, that even if we don't normally get a lot of helicopters, thinking about what we would do if we did have an incident involving one of those aircraft. Again, entry and rescue is something that we don't get to train on as often as we'd like to. So finding a way to be able to do that is great. Cargo incidents, again, cargo is getting more and more prevalent, it seems, with more and more people, doing their shopping, they're buying online, things are getting shipped around more. So cargo seems to be kind of expanding a bit. So being prepared for more possibility of incidents with cargo planes is going to be a great thing. And one big thing that's unfortunately doesn't always get to happen because of a variety of factors, but training with your mutual aid or your automatic aid. making sure that, the local fire department is going to come in, know what their role is. We want them to respond and say, okay, this is what our role is. This is what equipment we're bringing. This is what we're going to be expected to do. This is who we're going to interface with. Letting them practice that as well and get comfortable with their role as well is going to make the response go even better. Again, those are just off the top of my head, the big things that I would emphasize on in my training program.
And my last question for you today, after a major incident occurs, like we've seen recently, obviously it garners a lot of headlines in the press, and it starts to get on everybody's mind. So with that in mind, what should airports and ARFF crews be thinking about now to make sure their teams are going to be up to the task of responding to an incident if it were to happen at their facility?
Well, one of the things about these headline grabbing incidents is it is an opportunity, as unfortunate as they are. It is an opportunity for us to be able to kind of look within and say, hey, if that happened here, what would we have done? How would we have responded to that incident? That size, that type of aircraft, with that many people on board, with that presenting that kind of emergency, how would we have responded? Look at our equipment and our staffing. Look at our plan. Would our plan have worked? What adjustments we would have had to make? And then we can go from there. We can make improvements on our training or on our equipment based on what we've seen work and what we've seen have not worked. Again, just looking at them and saying, hey, if that happened here, could we have handled it? If we couldn't, what can we do to get better? If we believe we could, okay, what if, change the scenario a little bit? What if there had been more people on board? What if there had been hazardous material or cargo, something to that effect? Just kind of tweak things around and kind of look at it and say, what can we do to make ourselves better? All right. Make sure that our personnel equipment are ready to go, and just trying to consistently get better, more prepared for that response.
Ben, it's been a pleasure talking today. Really appreciate your time and a lot of great information that you've been able to provide for our listeners on this episode.
Well, thank you.
Thanks again for listening to today's podcast. For the latest ARFF information, please make sure to check out our website, AviationPros.com, along with our magazine, Airport Business. Also, if you enjoy the Aviation Pros podcast, please make sure to rate and review, and also subscribe to hear the latest episode. I'm Joe Petrie. Thanks again for joining us today.